Are you tired of quick fixes that promise transformation, but leave you feeling more disconnected from your body than ever? Well done. To the Beyond Medicine Humanized Care for Women of Influence, where we go deeper than surface level solutions. I'm Dr. Maria, a functional integrative medicine physician specializing in women's health, metabolic dysfunction, and hormone balance. Here, we will uncover the root causes of insulin resistance, PCOS, thyroid, and adrenal issues, and explore how trauma, stress, and anxiety impact your well being. Because your body's not a microwave, it deserves personalized, compassionate care that honors its complexity. Let's embark on a journey to reclaim your health one conversation at a time. And today with me, I have in the podcast Dr. Rita, who is the owner of Houston Community Surgical. And today we will be talking about her own personal journey related to healthy weight and relationship with food. So thank you, Dr. Rita, to this conversation. How about if you start just by simply introducing yourself, who you are, what you do? I know that you are board certified surgical specialist. So tell our listeners all about that before we dive into today's topic.
Awesome. Thank you, first of all, for having me. And I apologize for this cold that is resolving. So I have a little bit of a spicy voice today. But my name is Rita Belizaire. I'm a board certified general and colorectal surgeon. I opened my practice, Houston Community Surgical, as you mentioned, back in July of 2023, after working in corporate medicine for a very long period of time. I am a born and raised Texan, but I've lived all over the place. Was a previous athlete and now a single mom of two. But yeah, just enjoying treating the Houston community for their surgical needs and trying to raise my kids as best as I can.
And two very important full-time jobs.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So let's start to dive a little bit in what we're going to be talking about today. And I know that when I reached out to you, you said, "Oh, I want to tell my story."
Yeah.
And before we even go into the story, I want to ask you, why is it that you find that it is important that people listen to your story and know your story?
I think specifically related to weight, body size, and the things that come with it outside of health, the psychology behind it, because it wasn't until I actually got to a point where I felt comfortable in my body and healthy in my body that I actually gained the confidence to do things like opening my practice. And so I think, yes, there's a whole societal thing around it, but I think there's like a lot of internalized issues that happen when you're not in a body that you feel healthy and comfortable in. And I would not have been able to tell you this even a few years ago as I was becoming healthier, shedding some of the weight that I had. And so I just think it's important that people hear this story because there's just more to it than fitting in clothes and looking a certain way. There's like more of a metamorphosis that happens when you feel more comfortable in your body.
Yes. And I like the word that you use, metamorphosis. And you said it's more than just fitting in your body, so more than the physical. There is a transformation that goes deeper.
Wow.
And not only that if we think about the caterpillar and everything that happens when they're like in the cocoon, and then that beautiful result that is butterfly, that we know that they're common, right? I mean, they're out in a season.
Right. Right.
So all of that, it comes into play. So tell us a little bit more. I know that we're going to be talking about achieving a healthy weight.
Yes.
And when it comes to you and your personal journey, what were elements that perhaps helped you in that journey? And what were elements that you can say, this was not helpful for me?
Right.
And that not necessarily we need to eliminate completely, But if you can share, why was it that those elements maybe were not helpful, or maybe were even making it more like challenging, more distracting?
Oh man, that's sort of a low. I'll say this: things that were not helpful for me, or elements that I experienced both in childhood and adulthood, going through surgical residency where terrible stress, terrible sleep, terrible food that you would get on call and eat at 2 a.m., just terrible habits that I couldn't really help at the time, but it was, we were in survival mode. So being in survival mode, those things were not that helpful. And then once I got out of that, I had my kids after all that, after training. And so having kids at an older age, and then just not really feeling like I had the time or not committing the time to myself. Those were things that were not very helpful. Other sort of more psychological things were just feeling like it was a personal failure that I achieve and not like a biochemical issue or a genetic issue. So it was always a personal failure. I'm not doing this enough. I'm doing too much of that. Those sorts of things. Those were obviously not very helpful. Looking for quick solutions was not very, those were the sort of things that were not very helpful. The things that were helpful were psychological help, right? Getting help with figuring out why this was so bothersome to me, realizing that it was more of a metabolic and genetic issue. So seeking medical help for it. And while weight loss medications may not be the answer for everybody, they're absolutely a tool that some people need when they're doing all the other things correctly and not getting the results that they want. Essentially getting professional help all around were the things that I needed. Yep.
Yes. And I want to go back to a couple of things, right? And for those high achieving women that perhaps, even if they're not in like a surgical specialty, but perhaps they have another type of very demanding career. And I want to go back to that because I definitely think that in medicine, especially during residency, one of the things that we are taught in program is that it's almost like very codependent. We put our needs completely to the side. We give ourselves to others. And that means that you sacrifice a lot your health, right?
Yes.
You're not sleeping well. You're not eating well. You're not sleeping or eating when you need to.
Right.
You are not going to the bathroom when you need to go to the bathroom. And all of these things that you by yourself said it, you're in survival mode.
Yes.
And maybe your survival mode was related to that time frame because of your training. But we know that survival mode can be a gap of decades for some people because of life situations
Right.
that perhaps have been challenging and that they're not completely under their control. And in a way, you can say it was your choice to become a doctor. And yet, a lot of what we go through in training, especially at the beginning, we are not in control. We cannot say, I'm not going to be on call for
Right.
30 hours without sleeping.
Right. Or I'm just going to take the day off because I need.
And I'm going to sleep in. And I think that that's important because we know that this affect not only your biochemistry in terms of developing weight loss resistance, whereas it's harder because of all the hormones that start going into place. But at the same time, when you're in survival mode, you're not thinking about staying healthy. You're just thinking about surviving.
Exactly. Yes. But all of those psychological things about I don't like the way my body looks, my scrubs are fitting too tight or whatever, all those messages are still there. But if you're in survival mode, you can't really do much about it. Yeah.
No, you're just like going. You're just going. You're just going. So I think that it's important for people to hear that because again, all of our journeys are different. But perhaps stopping, I like the stopping, become aware, introspection. Perhaps that's one of the things that is happening in your life. And then you mentioned professional help.
Yes.
The other thing that I think that is very important to mention, I always say there's a very fine line between imposed lifestyle, chosen lifestyles, But then there's also, you mentioned it, the perhaps physiological differences in all of us
Yeah.
that for some people genetically we are predisposed to easily gaining weight. I'm just going to use those words. So for example, I know that my leptin receptor is different. Therefore, I know that for some people, they might think that it's just because I want to maybe eat a certain way for some reasons, or that it's about my physical appearance. But I am aware that it is, well, I am different in some areas, therefore I need to do this different.
Right. Yes.
And I think that's very important because sometimes, yes, in society, and tell me if this was perhaps part of the message that you were getting from society or from culture, it is believed that if a person has a larger body, that it is because they somehow is completely their fault or
Right.
their responsibility.
Oh, absolutely. And that's just how I grew up in the 80s and the 90s. And every January 1st, you would get the like People magazine that it's look at their transformation from this to this. And it always was cut this out of their diet and they did this kind of exercise. And so it was always like a personal thing that they were doing. And yes, while what you eat, what you consume is important for your health and daily activity is important for your health. Those like they're important for your health, not because of the size of your body. But that message was always intertwined. That was like a message that you're always given is that it is a personal failure if you cannot get skinny. And here's all these non-working methods that we're going to sell you for a lot of money so that you get there quickly.
Yes. And not only get skinny, but stay, especially I think that this message is stronger for women. So
Yes.
you stay skinny and you stay young and beautiful, right? All of these things that we can pursue. And I'm not saying that it's bad to pursue them. I just think that sometimes the pursuit of them can even become unhealthy for us.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Because you're never going to get there. And then let's say that you do, you then have to stay there. And then you realize you're not any happier because they're cut out so many of the foods that you love to eat, especially if you have a cultural background. I'm part Haitian, part Italian, and like food is part of our culture. And so we would be cutting out a lot of the happiness in our lives that comes with some of the food that we consume. And so there's not joy just because your body is smaller.
Absolutely. So I want to go back to a couple of things that you mentioned. So it's not about the body size or being skinnier. And then you mentioned the word perfectionism. And you have mentioned a couple of things that go into the relationship that we can have with our body in terms of body image, feeling good in our skin, which for me is not only about my body size, but once I start to also feel the fatigue, know that I know that I'm doing things that are just getting my body into this place where then it's going to explode.
Right.
How did you realize, oh, my perfectionism, again, high achieving woman, my perfectionism maybe was not my friend and was causing part of the obstacles or challenges that I personally had to deal with? And how were you able to then develop a kind relationship with your body?
And that journey actually is ongoing. But I think I didn't realize, I didn't label myself with perfectionism label until I left corporate medicine. If you look at my house, there's nothing perfect about it, right? There's mess everywhere, but that's not what perfectionism doesn't necessarily come in that container, right? When I realized that the things I was trying to do to try to start building my practice or creating my practice, it was like I couldn't take a step forward unless this was perfect. I didn't move forward unless the optics of it looked perfect to others. And that's when I realized, oh, you've got some perfectionism issues. Or like the procrastination part where I realized, and this was all in hindsight, I would not work on a presentation, let's say, until midnight. And then I would stay up all night perfecting it until the morning. And then I would give it's a 30-minute, 1 hour presentation. Then I realized that's perfectionism, the procrastination, and then the hyper focus. And so it wasn't until probably mid 2023 or
Mm.
early 2023 that I realized that perfectionism was part of it. And then looking back, I'm like, oh yeah, if I didn't do a diet perfectly, let's say I was on a diet and it was, let's say, pick one, I was on all of them. Let's say I was on like a low carb or no carb diet and I quote cheated and I ate one carb, then it was like everything out the window. Then it was like all or nothing, right? I would just eat all the carbs and the diet would be done, right?
Mhm.
So that to me was a form of perfectionism. If I couldn't follow it 100%, then it was zero. They're like,
Mm.
you had that carb and let's just get back to there was none of that. And so all of that sort of all or none thinking made me realize that yes, that perfection is there and it's problematic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, at least for me, again, the journey of becoming a physician, if you already have that tendency growing personality wise, you have grown up in a family that also empathizes that, and then you go into medical training, all of those voices just get augmented.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we have a medical conference every week called M&M Conference, Morbidity and Mortality, which is where we literally rake every case with a fine-tooth comb to figure out where you went wrong and what you did wrong and how to make it better. Literally, we were weekly. And I think it's okay to an extent, right? We want to learn from our medical mistakes,
Right.
things we could do better. So, like, some of that is really necessary in medicine, but then it gets extrapolated to every single part of our life. And so, yeah, so doing that for 7 years, like, it's hard to really detox from that when it comes to other aspects of your life.
Yeah. Yeah, it's reprogramming your brain, and we know that the
Yeah.
brain can heal, the brain can reprogram, and just it takes time, and you have mentioned it, for some people, it will take the right tools and professional help, and
Oh,
then
absolutely.
also the right community, the right support system.
Yeah.
So talking about community and support system, and if this is a little bit more of a vulnerable question and you want to skip it, that's fine.
Okay.
But sometimes when we are at this more like stage when we realize, oh my God, things have gone wrong in my life or things that I have believed or have been doing, when we start to examine our life story, a lot of the times there have been messages and things that had happened growing up, right? When we were kids, adolescent, and now you're a mom, you're a single mom. So, are there things that you have become aware that growing up, these were not useful comments? For example, I grew up in a home where you were, especially in any type of like family gathering,
Yeah.
you were going to be told if you have lost weight, increased weight, and especially when I became an adolescent, did I have acne in my face?
Oh, yeah.
Acne. You were going to be told something about your physical appearance for these people that are your family members. And
I'm laughing because I understand. Yes.
yeah, and still, when I travel back to Puerto Rico, I have an uncle. He is a retired radiologist, and I love him. He helped me pay for medical school. But he will always make a comment about like, oh yeah, stay fit so that your diabetes doesn't come back, right? So it's all about size of the body, the
Yeah.
external appearance. So are there things that perhaps you have become aware that growing up from that support system, from that family, perhaps could have been different and maybe would have made an impact that now as a mom, you are more aware. And that again, for our female listeners, you want them to know because they can help their kids.
Right. Never from my parents. In fact, my mother, anytime that I would say I wanted to be on a diet, it never came from her or my dad. Like they didn't care about body size. And they're medical. My father's a retired surgeon. My mother was an ICU nurse. But I will say that probably from the generation prior, there was value placed on appearance, specifically having a certain type of hair or a certain size body and not eating so much to have a bigger body. And so there was some emphasis placed on being more valuable if you looked pretty and had a smaller body. Now, this was not like in my home specifically, but it was definitely a message that was augmented anytime we were in your presence. And it just reinforced that societal message coming from a person that you like, that was older than you, that you loved and respected. You know what I mean? I do think that there's like a little bit of a cultural aspect. Sometimes in the Caribbean culture, it's not meant to be a value statement. It's just a fact like, oh, you got fat or oh, you lost weight. It's like a data point, but then all those societal messages still come rushing in, even if it's not the intent was not there to make you feel bad. If you know,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. So I want to ask you one more question about your personal journey before we transition on how this has impacted the way that you care for your patients and the relationship that you have with your patients.
Yeah.
The last question related to your personal journey is what elements, maybe tools or people, you wish that you would have had earlier on in your journey that you said, man, I wish that I would have known this, or I wish I would have had these tools.
I think honestly, just having a doctor that was, well, having a doctor, period. That's the end of one sentence. I didn't get a PCP till I was 40 and needed to get screening and all that kind of stuff. But I feel like recognizing that this was a metabolic and genetic issue rather than a personal failure would have led me to getting medical treatment for this a little bit sooner, or at least professional guidance when it comes to that. I think recognizing that it's not a personal failure and that there's probably a metabolic issue at play, and then finding that kind of expert to help with that. I wish I would have done that sooner. I've always been like a big proponent of mental health, but I didn't realize that it was something that I needed to bring to that person that could that this issue again was a personal failure. It wasn't a maybe I need to like rework why these things are happening with somebody who can do a deep dive from like a behavioral health or mental health standpoint. So I think the people that I have now, I just would have wanted that sooner.
Yes. And it sounds like you said the people that I have now, so plural, I want
Yes.
to emphasize that
Yes.
plural. So that means that there is a team, a group of people that you're working with that I am sure you feel comfortable at this stage. I feel that the relationship in medicine, because sometimes patients are attached to the insurance, and then if the insurance changes and the doctor is not anymore and all of this, and they have to start like copying. And I feel that for certain issues related to our health, especially if we want more of that holistic perspective
Yeah.
and that holistic care, having a long-term relationship is really important. And
Yeah.
I love that you talked about our mental well-being.
Yes.
And sometimes it's not that you're crazy. It's not that it's in your head. It's not that it's a label, because there's still a lot of bias related to mental health. But the reality is that, again, it's not mean something as simple as, oh, I have had a message of perfectionism that maybe when I was in medical school and residency served me.
Right.
Now it's not serving me. So can I switch that story and that
Yeah.
narrative in my head? And that doesn't mean that there's a problem with you or that you're broken or that you're
Right.
crazy.
Right.
So after going through all of this journey that transforms you as a person, how has that transformed you as a physician and the way that you care and relate to your patients?
Yeah, it's again, it's been an evolution, and even just since I started my practice, I've changed the way that I talk about like food, or even just not even necessarily related to food, but just the way patients receive medical advice from me as a patient in the way I deliver it. I'll give an example. A lot of times, let's say I'll trial somebody on a medication or an ointment or something like that and say, come back in 4 to 6 weeks. And they come back and I only used it for 2 weeks and I feel so ashamed. And I was like, the way that I approach it, I'm like, okay, sounds like life got in the way. Let's try again. You know what I mean? And so it's like a lot less like they're non-compliant or I do not use that word anymore. I'm like, or for example, if I say, instead of saying things like, you need to avoid red meat and processed foods and avoid, take out, that gives the message of there's shame if I have a bag of Cheetos, or there is shame if I go out to a steak dinner with my spouse or whatever. Now my message is the foods that are better for you that we can add to our day. I don't talk about, unless they ask what foods should I take out, I just say these are the things that we need to add to your diet. So you need to add fibers, add an apple, start with adding an apple a day. I don't say you need to cut everything out and have raw vegan diet, just not attainable, right? I think just approaching people as humans where life gets in the way, kids get in the way, you just don't feel like it because you're tired and burned out. Things like that approach, I feel patients receive that much better. I feel much better giving that message. And they're autonomous people. I'm just giving them advice. And if you want to take that advice, that's great. If I want to increase my chances of people taking that advice, then I have to approach it a different way. But also recognize that if they don't take that advice, it's not an insult to me. Like you don't take it personally. And so I think all of that just changes the way that I deliver the message and hopefully potentially how they receive that message if they're looking to get better health based on the advice that I'm giving them.
Yes, and I think so you mentioned a couple of things that are important. So one, trying to reduce that judgmental
Oh,
labeling perspective that
yeah.
sometimes physicians, and I think that anybody that works with people, we can have when we start to develop that relationship in the service type of careers and in
Yeah.
jobs and professions. I think that you also mentioned having less of those rules or having less the focus on what not, but instead of what to do.
Yeah.
So, I always try to tell the patient, let's prioritize the fiber and the healthy protein, right? These are the things, let's focus first on filling us with these things and then the other stuff.
Yeah.
And then you also mentioned the importance of meeting people where they are. And sometimes I tell patients, like, look, I can tell you exactly what to do. But the
Yeah.
reality is, you're the one who's going to go home and do the work. It's not me.
Right. Right.
What are you ready to do? I'm going to do it. What are you ready to do? And yesterday I told a patient, it was a little bit different, completely different in terms of the topic. But I told the patient, look, this is your body. If that's what you want to do, you're going to go and do that. I'm not going to tell you what to do with your body.
Yeah.
Because I think that when we take autonomy out of people, even if they don't want it, that listener brain kicks in like
Yeah.
response. And then anything that we're talking or we're trying to do, they are in fight fly because you just took away their autonomy.
Right.
And I think that is important, approaching it with that perspective. And then you mentioned something that I know that for some physicians, it can be challenging, which is, and if they don't completely listen to your advice or follow it to the letter,
Yeah.
don't take it personal.
Right. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. If they want to get a second opinion, it's their body, it's their health. You don't take it personally. And when you do, or you come at them with, like you were saying, like even judgmental undertones to things, they just won't follow back up with you. Like, lose them regardless. So if it's somebody you want to keep nurturing, then you have to meet them where they're at.
Yes, absolutely. So as we come towards the end, is there any other message or words that you want to leave our listeners with, and that you're saying, you know what, I don't want to leave this conversation without you doing this?
Yeah, this could be its own conversation, but one of the things I realized as somebody who lived in a bigger body and then I live in a less big body is that I didn't realize how much internalized, quote, fat phobia there was,
Mm.
even though I was a person who lived in a bigger body. I think I never would have done the things that I did had I not lost the weight. And I think that that is also when I realized that there's a lot of psychological work that needs to go into how we feel about our health and how we feel about our bodies. So, yes, you do need a medical doctor to try to help guide you through some of this stuff, but it's also like a very psychological thing. And so I urge people to not just look for quick fixes or doctors or non-doctors that are just going to give you the Ozempic off the street. That is not going to get you the result, the long-term result that you want. You need true professionals who are licensed and experienced to do this work to help you. And it's not going to be a quick fix because a quick fix is not a long-term fix.
Yes. And so you mentioned the psychological component, even if you're going to use a GLP-1 medication. And I think that the other thing that I will mention for the benefit of our listeners, I saw a patient, maybe it was, and she had been on semaglutide for 2 years. She achieved a weight loss threshold. And when I started to talk to her, something that I think that can be a disadvantage for the patient is she was only being told you give this injection to yourself. And then the other components that are important in this journey, and it's not only that you maybe change your diet, but let's make sure that the macronutrients that we need are there, right? That we're not compromising the fiber, that we're eating the high quality protein. She had never had a body composition analysis. So
Yeah.
do not know where she has been. Right. So there were all of these other elements that I feel that are very important in the journey. So if for the listeners, if you are on a GLP-1 medication, you are considering it, I think that my message is it's not that those medications are bad. And if you use them, you're bad because then that means that you're depending on the medication and you're a failure. But just as Dr. Rita said, make sure that you have a team of health professionals that are looking at the entire picture. And one of the things that this patient told me was like, I can't not even control the cravings anymore. And we know that the GLP-1s have an effect on the brain. Now we know that even for people that have an unhealthy relationship with alcohol, for example, it helps them. So we're seeing more and more benefits. But one of the things that was very interesting was that her depression and anxiety were not completely being treated.
Right.
Right. So even something as simple as that, I just want to put that message. Make sure that you are working with somebody that is looking at the entire picture and helping you.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. So then, Dr. Rita, where can people find you if they heard this conversation? Any chance they need somebody to also do any sort of colorectal surgery? And they're like, you know what? Well, she sounds cool. I want her to be my surgeon.
So my practice is called Houston Community Surgical. You can just Google that and it should pop up. I'm in the Heights area of Houston. I'm in an insurance-based practice. And they can find me on Instagram as well with my name, Rita Belizaire, MD. I think you said you'll put that in the show notes. And then for those outside of Houston, I do offer education and consultation if somebody's in need of either a second opinion or a case review. They can find all of that on my Instagram.
Great. Thank you. So for our listeners, thank you for being here. As Dr. Rita said, I will put all of that in the show notes so that you can stay in touch with her or either with us. And if today's episode was beneficial to you, you learned something, and you know of just one person, either a family or a friend, that would benefit from listening to this conversation, go ahead, share the episode with them because that will help them also in their health journey. Until next time. Bye.